What's going on, everybody? It's Jelly J NBA back with another video, and today's video is going to be a little different. I'm not going to be breaking down a specific player or telling you guys about a certain time in NBA history. Today I'm going to be dropping my 2020 NBA playoff predictions. But before we get into today's video, if you guys are new here and enjoy NBA content, consider subscribing. I upload basically every single day. Now, with the 8 seeding games done, the first game to be played is the play-in game versus the Portland Trail Blazers and Memphis Grizzlies. The way this game works is, since Portland is technically the 8th seed right now, the Grizzlies have to beat them 2 times in order to get into the playoffs. Now, I think this game could have a different outcome if Jaren Jackson Jr. was healthy for the Grizzlies, but I'll take Portland with the way Damian Lillard is playing right now, scoring 125 points in his last 3 games. Now, this prediction would move Portland into a first round matchup with the Los Angeles Lakers. Now, I think this series has a chance to get a little interesting, and what I mean by this is that I could see Portland winning one of the first 2 games in this series, and the media going crazy overreacting to LeBron potentially losing in the first round. But that won't happen, especially since LeBron has never lost in the first round of the playoffs in his entire career. And the fact that despite Damian Lillard playing at an MVP level, the Blazers have one of the worst defenses in the league. I'll take the Lakers in 5. Next, we have probably the most interesting matchup of the entire playoffs, that being the 4 versus 5 matchup in the West. The Thunder versus the Rockets. Everybody knows the story surrounding this series. Russell Westbrook and Chris Paul essentially switched teams, and now they meet in the playoffs less than a year later. Now, Westbrook is going to miss the beginning of this series due to injury, so things could get very interesting if OKC wins the first 2 games. OKC is the deeper team in my opinion and has played with a chip on their shoulder the entire season, but I think once Russ returns, him and Harden will be too much to handle for this young OKC team. I'll take the Rockets in 7. Next up, we have the Denver Nuggets versus the Utah Jazz. Now, this series I think could either be 5 games or 7 games. The Jazz were one of the most disappointing teams through the 8 seeding games in the bubble, while the Nuggets and Michael Porter Jr. literally stole the show. I think this Nuggets team has really come together since the restart and can take out this Jazz team quickly to be well rested for the next round. With that being said, I'll take the Nuggets in 5. The final first round matchup in the West is probably my personal favorite first round matchup in the entire playoffs, that being the Clippers versus Mavs. I think this series is where we will really get to find out a lot about this Dallas team. Can Luka and Kristaps Porzingis will this team to compete with the Clippers in a playoff series? I personally think the answer is yes, but I think this Clippers team is too experienced to lose this series, but I wouldn't entirely count out Dallas on the upset though. I'll take the Clippers in 6, but very close to 7. Now let's move on to the Eastern Conference, where the first round matchups are a lot easier to predict in my opinion. Bucks versus Magic. I think Orlando could possibly steal 1 game here, but without Jonathan Isaac to defend against Giannis, I don't think there's anybody on this team who can limit him. I'll take the Bucks in 4. Next, we have the most intriguing matchup in the East, that being a full playoff series between TJ Warren and Jimmy Butler. Warren obviously was one of the best players in the 8 seeding games, averaging 30 points with a 53-point performance against the Sixers. But I think without Domantas Sabonis and questions surrounding Victor Oladipo's health, coming back from a gruesome injury and not playing many games for this team this season, I'll take the Heat in 6. But I'm hoping there's another TJ Jimmy scrap within this series. Next, we have the Boston Celtics versus the Philadelphia 76ers. As a Philly fan, the 8 seeding games in the bubble were the biggest nightmare since the team did this. Going 3-5 in those 8 games with one of the easiest schedules and losing Ben Simmons for the year due to a knee injury, my Sixers bias still wants me to pick them to upset Boston, because I think Joel Embiid and Al Horford can give this Boston team major problems. But I'll take the Celtics in 6 in hopes that all my predictions are right. Let's just hope that Brett Brown gets fired after this season. The last first round matchup in the East is between the Toronto Raptors and Brooklyn Nets. Karis LeVert has played terrific in the restart in Orlando, but without KD and Kyrie, this team isn't much. They play hard and are very well coached, but I'll take the reigning champs in 4. Now moving on to the second round in the West, we have the Lakers versus Rockets. Based on the way the Rockets play and Anthony Davis being on the Lakers, I want to say the Lakers have the clear advantage. But Houston has played very well versus teams that play big, beating Milwaukee and Dallas in the 8 seeding games. This series will be close because the Lakers have nobody to guard Harden or Russ on the perimeter without Avery Bradley, but I'll take the Lakers in 7. Next, we have the Nuggets versus Clippers, a matchup versus the 2 deepest teams in the Western Conference, maybe even the entire playoffs. Now, I do think this Nuggets team can win a few games versus this Clippers team, but I think the one thing that they are missing is a good wing defender to defend against guys like Kawhi, PG, and Lou Will. I'll take the Clips in 6. Moving back over to the East, we have the Bucks versus the Heat in the second round. Now, the Heat have played very well against this Bucks team this season, and Bam Adebayo is statistically the best Giannis defender in the league. So I think that this series can get very interesting. Milwaukee hasn't looked the same since the restart, but I think they will eventually be too much to handle for this Miami team. I'll take the Bucks in 7. The last second round matchup in the East is the Raptors versus Celtics. Now, this is probably going to be my biggest surprise prediction up to this point, and I'm going to be taking Toronto in 6, and here's why. I think they have too many big bodies across the front line and are much deeper than the Celtics team and will just eventually tire them out and win the series. Moving back over to the West for the Western Conference Finals, we have the much highly anticipated matchup between the Los Angeles Lakers and the Los Angeles Clippers. Now, I think this series can get very, very interesting, and I do believe that it will go to 7 games based off how these teams have played each other this season. They play each other very close, and I think this game is going to be the best matchup throughout the entire playoffs, even better than the finals matchup, because these, in my opinion, are the 2 best teams in the league. With all of that being said, I'm going to be taking the Clippers in 7 games. I think the Clippers are just too deep of a team, and the Lakers are really missing their perimeter defense since the restart in the bubble. I do think LeBron will do everything in his power to will this Lakers team to get to the finals, but I think eventually the Clippers' depth will just be a little bit too much. Moving back over to the East, we have the rematch between the Toronto Raptors and Milwaukee Bucks. Last season, these 2 teams played in the Eastern Conference Finals, and we all know how that went. The Bucks jumped out to a 2-0 lead in the series, but Toronto eventually won this series in 6 games after they had a great game plan to defend against Giannis. Now, obviously, losing Kawhi is going to hurt them defending against Giannis, but I still think this team is built to beat Milwaukee. I think they have too many guys on their roster that are capable of defending Giannis, and I think they just give him a lot of problems. I know Giannis will be trying to do everything in his power to get to the finals to improve on his legacy, but I'm going to be taking the Raptors in 7. I think the Raptors are just too deep of a team, too well coached, and are really just hungry to get back to the finals. And the final matchup that we have, and if it is to happen would actually be pretty crazy, is the Toronto Raptors versus Los Angeles Clippers. Kawhi versus his former team. This would obviously be one of the most highly anticipated matchups in the finals that we've seen in a very long time. Predicting this series, I do think that the Clippers would end up coming out on top just because I think they have more guys on their team that can get buckets during the end of a game in crunch time. And what I mean by that is you have Paul George, you have Kawhi Leonard, you have Lou Williams, you have all those guys on that team that can get you buckets when you need it. And the Raptors, in my opinion, they don't have that many guys to do it. I think I would eventually take the Clippers in 7 games here. I think they could win in 6. So I would take the Clippers in 7 here. I think if we get that matchup, it would be great to see. But yeah, those are my predictions, guys. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like and subscribe for future content just like this. And I'll catch you guys in the next one.